Your mother has been acting erratically," Dr. Hendricks said flatly. I stared at him across his desk. My son Marcus stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. A gesture that suddenly felt possessive rather than supportive. The words hung in the sterile office air like poison gas. "What do you mean, erratically?" I asked carefully. The doctor opened a folder. Marcus's fingers tightened on my shoulder. Something in that small movement made my stomach clench. I'd known Marcus my entire life, 42 years of knowing him, and I'd never seen him so tense before a simple medical appointment. Dr. Hendricks began reading from notes. Forgetfulness, mood swings, difficulty with finances. Each word was a small hammer blow, and I realized with growing horror that none of it was true. I hadn't forgotten anything. My moods were stable, and my finances? I'd been managing them perfectly well for 63 years. "I think we should schedule a full cognitive assessment," the doctor continued, not meeting my eyes. That's when I understood. This wasn't a medical visit. This was a setup. I'd found the papers 3 days ago, hidden in a manila folder beneath Marcus's desk when I was helping his wife Diane organize their home office. Court documents. A petition to declare me mentally incompetent, filed by Marcus and Diane, scheduled for next week. My hands had gone cold when I read the words. Not the cold of shock, the cold of recognition. I knew exactly what this was about. My husband Robert had passed away 14 months ago. He'd left me the house. He'd left me his life insurance. He'd left me the investment portfolio worth just over $2 million. And he'd left me as sole executor of his estate, which meant I controlled the distribution of everything to Marcus, his brother David, and their families. Marcus had been asking for money, large amounts. First, it was $50,000 for a business opportunity. Then another $100,000 for a real estate venture. Then he wanted me to add him to the title of the house. Each request had come with pressure, with guilt-tripping about how much I supposedly owed him for taking care of me after Robert's death. I'd said no to all of it. Now, he was going to have me declared incompetent so he could take control of everything himself. I sat there in that office, Marcus's hand still on my shoulder, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let him see that I knew. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I needed to gather evidence, to understand the full scope of what he was planning, and to protect myself legally before he made his move. "I'd like to schedule that assessment," I heard myself say calmly. "When would you recommend?" Marcus relaxed slightly. The hand on my shoulder became almost gentle again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything I needed to do. I had 6 days. 6 days to build a case against my own son. 6 days to protect myself from the person I'd raised, nursed through chickenpox, driven to soccer practice, helped through his first heartbreak. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Eleanor Vasquez had handled Robert's will, and she was sharp, the kind of woman who didn't miss details. I met her at her office downtown, a sleek space on the 15th floor of a glass building that caught the morning light in sharp, clear angles. "Show me everything," Eleanor said, and I did. I'd brought copies of the court documents I'd photographed with my phone. I'd brought screenshots of Marcus's text messages asking for money. I'd brought documentation of my bank accounts, my investment statements, my medical records showing no signs of cognitive decline. I'd brought the names of 3 doctors who could testify to my mental fitness. Eleanor read through it all slowly, methodically, making notes in a leather-bound notebook. When she finished, she looked up at me over her reading glasses. "This is premeditated financial exploitation," she said quietly. Your son is attempting to gain control of your assets by having you declared incompetent. It's fraud, and it's elder abuse under state law." The words landed like stones in water. Elder abuse. My own son. "What do we do?" I asked. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "First, we get ahead of this. I'm going to file a motion to dismiss his petition before it even gets to court. I'm going to attach your medical records, your financial documentation, and statements from your physicians. I'm going to make it clear that you're of sound mind and that this petition is frivolous." "Will that stop him?" I asked. "Legally, yes, but it won't change his mind. He'll know you know, and he'll likely retaliate in some way. You need to be prepared for that." I nodded slowly. I was prepared, or at least, I was becoming prepared. The shock had worn off, replaced by something harder, colder. This was my son, but he'd shown me who he really was. And I wasn't going to let him take what was mine. Eleanor filed the motion that afternoon. She sent copies to Marcus's attorney, a slick man named Gerald Pines, who'd clearly been hired specifically for this job. By evening, my phone had started ringing. It was Diane, Marcus's wife. Her voice was high and tight, almost hysterical. "How could you do this to him?" she demanded. "He's your son. He's worried about you. And now you're threatening him with lawyers?" I held the phone away from my ear, listening to her words crash against me like waves. She was good at this. The emotional manipulation, the guilt, the reframing of his criminal behavior as concern. I wondered how much of this was her idea and how much was Marcus pulling the strings. "I'm not threatening anyone," I said quietly. "I'm protecting myself." "You're being paranoid. You're exactly what Marcus said. You're losing it mentally. This proves it." I hung up. Then I blocked her number. The next call came from David, my younger son. David lived in Portland, and we'd never been particularly close, but he'd always been decent to me. His voice was confused when I answered. "Mom, what's going on? Marcus says you're refusing to cooperate with a medical evaluation and that you're threatening legal action against him." "Marcus is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can steal my money," I said flatly. "I found the court documents. I have a lawyer now, and I'm going to fight this." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. That's a serious accusation," David said finally. "It's not an accusation, it's a fact. I have the papers. I have his text messages asking for money. I have documentation of everything." Another silence. Then, "I need to talk to Marcus. I need to understand what's happening." After David hung up, I sat in the kitchen and made tea. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I was thinking more clearly than I had in months, actually. The fog that had been hanging over me since Robert's death, the grief, the confusion, the sense that I was somehow failing to understand the world, had lifted. I could see everything now with perfect clarity. I spent the next 2 days gathering more documentation. I pulled every bank statement from the last 5 years. I organized my investment portfolio. I made a timeline of every request Marcus had made for money, every conversation we'd had about finances. I wrote down everything I could remember about his behavior over the past year. The way he'd started visiting more frequently, the way he'd begun asking about my health, the way he'd suggested I might be having trouble remembering things. It was all so calculated, so deliberate. On the 4th day, Eleanor called me. "The judge has already reviewed the motion to dismiss," she said. "She's inclined to grant it. She's also flagged the petition as potentially frivolous, which means Marcus's attorney could face sanctions. Gerald Pines knows this. He's already started backing away from the case." "What does that mean?" I asked. It means Marcus is going to lose. The petition will be dismissed. You'll be vindicated. But it also means he's going to be desperate. People do desperate things when they realize they're about to lose everything. I understood what she wasn't saying. Marcus would escalate. He did. The call came on the morning of the 5th day. It was Marcus, his voice calm and reasonable, in a way that made my skin crawl. "Mom, I think we should talk," he said. "In person. Just you and me. No lawyers." "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "I'm your son. I love you. I'm worried about you. Can't we just sit down and discuss this like a family?" The manipulation was so transparent now that it was almost laughable. But underneath it, I could hear something else. Panic. He was panicking. "I'll meet you," I said. "But Eleanor is coming with me." "No lawyers," he said sharply. "If you bring a lawyer, I'm done talking." "Then we're done talking now," I said, and I hung up. But I didn't feel done. I felt like I was just beginning. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Eleanor had prepared me thoroughly. She'd coached me on what to expect, how to answer questions, how to remain calm if Marcus or Diane tried to provoke me. She'd lined up my 3 physicians to testify about my mental fitness. She'd prepared a presentation of my financial records, showing that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was something else. Something that felt almost like anticipation. I was going to walk into that courtroom and face my son. I was going to watch him fail. I was going to reclaim my life. I wore a navy suit to the hearing. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Just a professional woman of 63, perfectly composed and completely in control. Eleanor had suggested it, and she was right. Appearance mattered in court. The courthouse was crowded. I didn't see Marcus or Diane until we were already seated at the defense table. They were across the room, Marcus in a dark suit that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Diane beside him in a dress that was too formal for the occasion. They both looked angry. Marcus looked furious. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Patricia Carmichael was a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She'd already reviewed all the paperwork. She already knew what this case was about. Gerald Pines stood to present the petition. He was clearly uncomfortable. He stumbled through his opening statement, presenting the evidence of my mental incompetence, which consisted entirely of hearsay from Marcus and Diane, with no medical documentation whatsoever. Then Eleanor stood. She presented my medical records. All 3 of my physicians testified via video conference, each one confirming that I was of sound mind, that I showed no signs of cognitive decline, that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs and making my own decisions. She presented my financial documentation, showing that I'd managed my investments successfully for decades and had only become more conservative and careful with age. Then she presented the text messages. Marcus asking for $50,000. Marcus asking for $100,000. Marcus suggesting that I add him to the title of the house. Each message was projected on a screen for the judge to see. I watched Marcus's face as those messages appeared. I watched him realize that I'd saved them, that I'd documented everything, that his manipulation had been recorded and preserved for this exact moment. The judge looked at Marcus over her glasses. "Mr. Myers, do you have anything to say in your own defense?" Marcus stood up. His attorney put a hand on his arm, trying to stop him, but Marcus shook it off. He looked directly at me. "My mother is not well," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "She's been isolated since my father died. She's making poor decisions. She's being taken advantage of by people who want her money. I'm trying to protect her. By having her declared incompetent without her knowledge? The judge asked coldly. By taking control before she destroys everything, Marcus said. The judge's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room. The temperature seemed to drop. Your petition is dismissed, Judge Carmichael said. And I'm issuing an order of protection. You are not to contact your mother regarding her finances, her medical care, or her property. Any further attempts to have her declared incompetent will result in criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. This court is adjourned. She banged her gavel once, sharply, and it was over. I stood up slowly. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder. Around us, people began gathering their papers and filing out. I didn't look at Marcus. I didn't need to. I could feel him staring at me, his anger radiating across the courtroom like heat from a furnace. But I was already moving toward the exit, toward the hallway, toward the elevator that would take me down and out of this building and away from my son. The weeks that followed were strange. I'd won, but winning didn't feel the way I'd expected it to feel. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where my relationship with my son used to be. David called me 2 days after the hearing. He'd been in the courtroom. He'd heard everything. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know. I thought he was actually worried about you. He was worried about my money, I said. Not about me. I know that now, and I'm ashamed that I didn't see it sooner. I want you to know that I'm not like him. I don't want anything from you except a relationship with my mother. I believed him, and over the following months, David and I developed a closeness we'd never had before. He visited regularly. He helped me with projects around the house. He introduced me to his girlfriend, a kind woman named Helena, who made him happy. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a real relationship with at least one of my sons. Marcus, I didn't hear from again. He sent a letter through his attorney asking for a reconciliation, but Eleanor advised me not to respond. The order of protection was in place. He couldn't contact me directly, and I had no desire to hear from him. The house felt different after that. Quieter, but not in a bad way, just quieter. I made changes. I redecorated Robert's office into a study for myself. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I joined a book club. I started traveling, small trips at first, then longer ones. I went to Italy. I went to New Zealand. I went to places I'd always wanted to see, but had been too busy or too afraid to go. A year after the hearing, I was in my study, looking through some old photographs, when I found a picture of Marcus as a child. He must have been about 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a fish he'd caught at a lake. I remembered that day. I remembered how proud he'd been. I remembered thinking that he was going to be a good man. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I put it away. I couldn't change who he'd become. I could only protect myself from him. And I had. Today, I'm 65 years old. My hair has more gray in it than it used to. My hands have age spots that weren't there before. But my mind is sharp. My finances are secure. My life is my own. I learned something from all of this, something that took me years to fully understand. Love isn't enough. Blood isn't enough. Family isn't enough to protect you from exploitation. You have to protect yourself. You have to see people clearly, even when they're your own children. You have to be willing to fight, even when the fight is against someone you raised. I also learned that I was stronger than I thought I was. That I could face down my son in a courtroom and not break. That I could reclaim my life and build something new from the pieces. If you're in a situation where someone is trying to manipulate you or take advantage of you, don't stay silent. Document everything. Find a good lawyer, and don't let blood relations stop you from protecting yourself. Your life is worth fighting for.